Well, welcome to another edition as we are talking about cryptocurrency, blockchain, and real estate, all three fun and exciting topics. I'm really excited today to have a great guest, Michael Hiles, somebody that I've been working with personally, some interesting tech opportunities within the real estate and blockchain space. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Michael introduce himself and tell a little bit about what he's been up to, and then we'll jump into the programming. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Hey, thanks, Chip. I appreciate it. So I'm Michael Hiles. I'm CEO, founder of a company called 10xts, 10xts.com. We're a universal tokenization infrastructure provider for market infrastructure for decentralized capital markets. We provide securities issuers who are raising money for various projects, including real estate, a way to tokenize their securities and their securities assets to then become compatible with to list and trade and move around on various licensed exchanges and broker dealer networks across the decentralized marketplace.
Yes, and Michael is one of the smartest people that I've met in the space. I've talked to a lot of people in the space, both on the tech side and on the business development side, and so forth. And one thing about Michael is he is your history of just what you've developed and so forth. And I'd like to touch on that a little bit. Talk about sort of what you did early on, and then how you got introduced to blockchain and your first sort of foray into the cryptocurrency space, and then sort of, obviously now we know what you've got going on.
Yeah. So back in the 70s, when computers were these big mainframes, my dad worked for one of the earliest software companies in existence, a company in Cincinnati, Ohio called Cincinnati Computing Systems, CINCOM, CINCOM. And CINCOM's actually recognized as the first independent software vendor in history, in the history of computing. And being literally a kid in elementary school, I had no idea that normal human beings had never even seen a computer outside of maybe a Bugs Bunny cartoon. But I just thought it was normal. So I grew up surrounded by computing software data, and it really shaped the rest of my entire adult life and career. So I've been through the iteration of multiple technology cycles, even as a young kid in junior high school. PCs became the next advent of technology adoption, and through the various iterations of networking technology and the internet and mobile computing and social media, and then of course the natural evolution was that of the advent of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So I started really tracking very early on, just from a programming standpoint and cryptography and a coding standpoint. um, Computing used to be an electrical engineering competency, and so these magical things called state channels and communication channels and protocols are the really the foundational bases upon which even the internet is built itself. And cryptocurrencies are blockchain is essentially built as a protocol level network, as an evolution of the data and the information technology. So knowing that it would be the internet all over again, but instead of just for information, but for actually transactions themselves, I started identifying opportunities around that as it would eventually evolve into enterprise use cases and value propositions to be adopted by business as the technology goes mainstream. And here we are.
Wow, yeah, and that's crazily impressive how early you were and how deep into it you are. Well, let's talk about some of the things that you're working on right now through 10xts, and some of the. I know some of them you're at liberty to share with the general public, and then others, obviously, you've got to sort of keep under the hat as some of this product development comes avails itself. Talk about some of the things that you can share with the public, projects that you're working on. I think you've got some really super cool stuff, and talk about sort of where you are in that life cycle and what's going on right now.
Sure. So, the idea of tokenizing assets and securities is not new. When I certainly didn't invent that concept, there's lots of smart people that realized, uh, early on, that cryptocurrency technology, the underlying technology of blockchain, can be applied to traditional use cases that don't involve just cryptocurrencies. How do you then apply that technology in such a way that a digital unit of account, a token, a unit of account on a network can indeed represent a real world asset or a security? Um, and lots of folks got into that space early on and started creating these public cryptocurrency network based tokens and pointing to them and saying, well, that token there in that particular wallet account represents a share of stock in my company, or it represents, a limited partnership unit. And there was very early efforts to use this unit of account as some form of ownership or value designation. And of course, when we're talking about securities and applying the technology to a traditional, capital markets and finance space, it is regulatory. There is no question about it that the unit of account of a token actually does represent a security, as opposed to a lot of the cryptocurrency conversations where, is it a security? Is it a commodity? Is it, what is it, right? Whose regulatory regime does it fall under? So it's very easy for us to define the world in which we live because everything we do is regulated as a security or as a financial asset that falls under the scope of some supervisory authority. Um, so, in recognizing tokenization as an emergent form of remix, digital transformation, if you will, of the finance and capital markets, we recognize some interesting things very early on. One is, just like in the history of computing, pre widely adopted technology, there's no standard in place, right? There's people accomplish the same goal but do it differently, and you see at an institutional level where there's a lot of tokenization, and a lot of institutions are offering the opportunity to tokenize, and sure, they might even create an ethereum based layer one token for you. But what you'll find very quickly is even though that layer one unit of account token might be very easily portable from wallet A to wallet B, as that token is applied in that particular financial context, all the other data, all of the other information, compliance, governance, risk that goes along with that asset is not as easily portable. In fact, there's a lot of reluctance by the institutions to adopt an open standards approach to data. And if you look to what Europe went through with open banking, they're ahead of us, right? And then
Yeah.
even early entrance to open banking in the United States from a financial standpoint, companies like Plaid, for example, that have different account level interoperability for authentication and payments and e-commerce account access. We saw the opportunity to really create a solution for issuers that want to tokenize their assets and their securities, to create a solution that allows them to not be subject to the control of a specific institution's data management, whatever their walled garden policies are around their data, but to actually undertake the digital transformation exercise themselves, and then be in a position to go to those institutions ahead of time, well armed with their architecture, with their requirements, to be able to present to that institution how they want to be served as a client of the institution. And the institutions have struggled with recognizing that fact, but in the end we believe that decentralization comes as a result of the issuer taking control of the sovereign ownership of the data about their entity, their asset, their investors, all of that is the promise of decentralization. And being independent of a institution driven solution is really our focus of being able to put issuers and their investors on the right path as the markets continue to decentralize.
No, and it's an interesting perspective that you all are approaching it from, because I struggle with this mightily myself as we sort of look at ways to tackle the technology opportunities and how it interrelates with real estate, things such as deed on chain, and you're essentially sort of reworking it from the inside out, which I like because what we have found, and you've been involved in some of these conversations when you start at the financial institutional level, and I'm talking about the banking side of it, the traditional banking side of it. The firewalls are aplenty, and then typically the first line of defense. And I'm not casting stones. I'm just repeating conversations that I've had. Is they're gonna sort of hide behind the veil of regulation and compliance, and we can't do that, we can't do that, we can't do that. So I find it actually, one, refreshing, but two, interesting that you're building a system really focused on the holders of the information, that it's important to the client, and then saying, hey,
That's right.
here you go. We've built the networking capabilities for you. Now you're the client. You need to go to whomever you're going to be working with and say, here's how we would like to move our information around. Here's how we would like to have the custodial, whatever it may be, look like. And I think that's powerful because
Yep.
without that sort of, I almost like to say you're like lighting a spark. Then we could potentially just sort of bat around a lot of these concepts. And if those concepts are held in the wrong hands, let's be honest, they're not going to really percolate much more.
Yeah, there's no reason to decentralize, right? If customers, of banking and financial institutions and capital markets, are content with their data continuing to be locked inside of those institutions, that there really is no benefit of decentralization. The promise of decentralization, of optionality in markets, optionality and liquidity, right? Transparency, right? Speed of settlement, self-sovereign ownership of your data and your information, right? And optionality of where you want your asset to go, right? Where do you want your asset to trade? What, markets do you want them to trade on? There is a day of reckoning that's coming for banking that, they've, for the past decade, have viewed fintech as the enemy, and that's the competition. And we've got to go out and we've got to build a competitive product of our own to offer to customers so that they don't go over there and use that Zelle thingy or whatever, right?
Right, right.
And what they've forgotten is that they're not the only people that are able to undergo a digital transformation exercise. Their clients are sophisticated. Institutional enterprise clients, they're exploring technology optimization in their own right. What are the value propositions of their customers? And they stop being responsive from a technology standpoint, so that when a sophisticated institutional investor comes to them and says, look, I got, $5 billion in assets with your financial institution. I'm now going to, tokenize my capital stack, transform how my CFO's office operates. How can you continue to provide me with banking services that I need relative to this digital exercise, right? And these R&D departments and these CIOs and these institutions have got to adopt a solutions provider based approach and stop being their own branded version of their own knockoff of Zelle, and that's their fintech and their digital
Yeah.
transformation, right? It's like, listen, guys, we're past that, right? That
Right,
ship
right,
that
right,
ship
right,
has sailed, you
right,
know.
right. That's
So
what I love is when you get like these treasury folks coming to us, we're in the escrow business, like we've got this, we can capture, remote capture this and that. And you're just like, you hate to say it, but it's like yawn, yawn, yawn. This is, that's 15 years of old of tech. And now, we did the wall to wallet exchange on a closing a couple weeks ago. And, once again, it was a hybrid. It was definitely not where we want to be as we build out, but it was just, it was cool to see two people sitting at a closing table exchanging Bitcoin in real time. One, it cost 70 cents. Two, it took 8 seconds. And three, it was the most secure transaction we've performed, in terms of not having, potential disintermediation of the payment rail system through phishing or, other nefarious ways. I want to talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about we're gonna pivot over into the real estate world, which is everybody acknowledges that really understands the basis of blockchain and some of its what you can do with it as a technology base. Talk a little bit about your theories or your thoughts around putting title on chain. I mean, you and I have had a lot of discussions between us or in collective groups, but one, you do have some real world experience in the space, but two, just your thoughts of a pathway potentially, assuming that if in the world of Michael Hiles, because you understand sort of the tech piece of it, and you also understand the real world application because you've worked with recording offices before, which is
That's
a
right.
unique skill set in itself.
Yeah, I mean, I spent a good part of my pre-blockchain career in government system support, and that spanned from county, state, county, local government, office management, from a data and application standpoint. Significant it was in public records as well, court case and public record systems. And at present, there's approximately zero county recorder's office that actually recognize a token on a blockchain as a true and valid form of recordation of a deed or a title. Um, so the question becomes, what is the path towards a recognition and an acceptance of this? What does this kind of a thing take? And particularly when you look at like the mathematically provable construct of a non-fungible token, right? Can that token represent a unique digital network based representation of the real world thing, right? In the real world, and how do you tie those together? And then how does the government also then recognize that record from a records management standpoint? How do you close the loop in that regard? We know it's more efficient, right? We know that the data and the transferability, the token based representation of an asset, it's we work with it in the private sector, so we see it in other case study applications. And when the government recognizes that there are forms of record keeping that it's beyond just the court system, but the recorder's office, that's a system of truth, right? The reason it's a system of truth is because the information that's contained in these files, some elected official, some constitutional agent is standing there with the authority to say this is the official signature or this is the official seal of record that says that this information, this record is true and valid. And I think it's interesting because I don't want to necessarily time date this particular podcast, but of course, we just got a nice executive order from President Biden to examine, cryptocurrencies and central bank digital currencies and all of the technology of blockchain and distributed ledgers, and one of the focuses is, of course, the what's the environmental impact of the energy of running Bitcoin. And so it kind of sparked a little bit of curiosity in my book. And I wondered, well, I wonder how much energy the banking industry just uses today in a traditional fashion. Well, lo and behold, one of the big criticisms of Bitcoin is this is massive energy consumer, but it's less than half of the consumption of the banking sector, finance sector on a global basis, on a terawatt hour basis on from an annual energy consumption. And if you apply that same thinking to government, right, and to a state that has many counties of recorders offices or whatever, that you have even within divisions of government replication of computing and data that interacts with the same common data. It's just they're
Right.
storing it separately, they're processing it separately in its own form. And what is the benefit and the cost savings and the advantages from adopting a digital, immutable mathematical, encrypted form of system of truth for those records, right? And I would begin to believe that it's out of the gate billions of dollars of cost savings annually
Yeah.
across the whole breadth of national government. And and of course, when you have states that are progressive and try to have blockchain working groups and legislative committees to explore the use of the technology, there's just not enough awareness, there's not enough subject matter expertise to be able to split the hair and say, okay, well, this is why we want to go in and why we want to actually establish an initiative to explore a digital transformation exercise as a government agency. But I think the private sector plays a role in that from an education standpoint. I think that being able to demonstrate the use of the technology in the entire workflow, except for this part here that says the recorder's office does their thing internally,
Yeah.
right? But the broader workflow of industry, private sector workflows of the transfer of title and record, I think that we can help fill in the blanks, right? And provide best practices. But it is going to take progressive jurisdictions to lean in. I know Cook County, Illinois, very progressive. They've got a couple of key individuals there that are very knowledgeable about recordation, and they're very progressive. But they're just one county, right? They're just a big county, without question. It's a massive county, but at the same time, it's just literally one little drop of water in the broad ocean. So and government technology adoption and life cycle is not a fast thing, right? I mean, they're lagging in the market adoption. So if I had the magic answer, I'd be Jeff Bezos, I guess, at this point. But I
Oh, you're on to it, man. I know it. I know it. Well, no, that's helpful just to frame the conversation, because a lot of times, when you're having these conversations with people regarding, it's immediate, like real estate should be on the blockchain immediately, and it would eliminate this, and it would create efficiencies there, and my response typically is, yes, but there are elements that we have to work through. It's a process, as you just laid out, and then the ultimate is, go back to crawl, walk, run is where I am. And I think I do believe this is I've sort of, my position early on was very escrow focused and very payment focused, and how do we use blockchain, and how do we use that as a payment rail system enhancement, and also creating this digital currency rail system so that exchange of funds more secure, faster, cheaper. And that's just one element. That's the escrow piece of it. The other piece of it obviously is on the title side, and I think sort of an interesting snowball that I've watched. Now, the you talked early on about securities and that aspect, but the tokenization, this fractional ownership idea around developments, and commercial is real estate's where we're starting to see some use case and actually projects being developed. And I think that's a good first step for people to understand. To me, there's obviously the security piece of it, and the ability for to go, and it's immutable, and you have this, you eliminate some of these fraud elements, and you also can get a more efficient system of indexing. I mean, those are all enhancements. But the other enhancement that there's less talk about in our space, but I think from a real world practicality space, is the price discovery opportunities and the value enhancement that comes out of that, and the efficiency and the ability to move this asset, this token, around in a without as much friction and as much legalese, and some of these other underpinnings that really make it hard for people to come in and out of real estate. So, that's exciting for someone like myself. Is how do we
yeah,
open the playing field to more people, so that you're not having to go form an LLC and get four of your friends together to go buy into a duplex or a fourplex.
sure. Yeah, the low hanging fruit right now is to tokenize the capital stack, right? I mean, make it the
Yeah,
security, the right and rem ownership, the title and the deed, is held by the special purpose vehicle entity, and you run your 506, you run your, whatever offering to, to capitalize the equity of that, particular project. Um, Now that being said, it is getting a lot of traction, and you're finding, a lot of the, small to medium ticket investors, I would call it the, the RIA folks, the Real Estate Investors
yeah,
Association,
yep,
you know,
yep.
they recognize that, they have to cooperate with each other to, really syndicate and, go head to head in, project bidding against, even the medium to small tier institutional. side, right? So syndication becomes a name of the game right out of the gate. And, of course, you have the perennial issue of illiquidity of real estate as an asset. And of course,
Yep.
tokenization now provides a vehicle for secondary market trading and listing and trading of that security on regulatory rails. And that's been the real focus of our efforts is really around that capitalization stack. That being said, it completely leaves the other side of the equation off the table, the title, right?
Yeah.
Insurance, all of the other rest of the puzzle that goes along with real estate. Just tokenizing the cap stack is one aspect, but then you've got the tokenization of all of these other components and these other layers that are certainly on the table. It's just that a bunch of us have been hard at work in the finance and the capital space ahead of the rest of the downstream. And that's just where you see the maturation of the market in the security side first. I think it'll get there. It's
Well, and,
just
and I and I would suggest that um, as this develops and as you get more adoption on the cap stack side, you're bringing more people into the space and understanding it and being comfortable, and not. I had I was on the podcast earlier today, and we were talking about how I sometimes when I'm talking to peers especially in the title space and other, talking to legal people and so forth, I'm almost afraid to say cryptocurrency because the walls go up. They're oh
right,
my gosh, blah blah. So I
right.
typically say blockchain and digital, digital currency to sort of keep everybody at ease. But my perspective is that as these projects pick up and as you get more folks involved and as these financial institutions on the traditional banking side come kicking and screaming to the party, you will get, you're going to see it evolve, and then that's going to open or at least give people in like MySpace a better runway to jump in, because the problem is right now is we would love to be the thought leaders in this space, and we're trying to position ourselves in that spot. But we also have to be disciplined in how what we can push right now, because we don't necessarily want to go all in on a strategy that is not quite ready to go. So that leads me to I've got two final takeaways for you before we let you go. The first is sort of, if your crystal ball, where do you see things the next 12 months? I know you're working, I believe, and I don't know if you can you talk about you're working potentially with another country maybe or something? Are you at
Yeah, I
liberty to
mean,
talk?
from a market infrastructure standpoint, we've got multiple national, sovereign countries that are leaning in because they see the digital transformation of their own capital markets as sovereign nations, as an opportunity to jump ahead in the marketplace. So, we've been invited to El Salvador to meet with the government of El Salvador and the ministries there. We've got conversations going in, across LATAM. That market, all of Latin America market is really leaning in to tokenization, real estate, capital, as well as Pacific Rim. Blockchain's obviously had a great foothold in Singapore and a lot of the Pacific Rim. The United States is absolutely a laggard in the
Yep.
scope of the rest of the world when it comes to the adoption of these technologies, even from a regulatory standpoint. That being said, when you have bellwether moments like the announcement that the largest custodial bank in existence, State Street, with 4.1 trillion in assets under custody, are now going to start, working to custody, at least cryptocurrency and digital assets. So I would argue that, we're post distaste for crypto at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you're talking to somebody and they're recoiling in
Yeah.
sheer horror because of blockchain and crypto,
Yeah. Right.
it's sort of
Right.
like,
Right.
well, wait a second, time out. You're
Yeah.
obviously
Yeah.
not paying attention
Yeah.
because we are past that. If you're still sort of living under that cloak, then you're probably falling behind in your general attitude towards the evolution of the market, and you need to pay attention because it's no longer scary. And if it's not scary for a federal bank to
Yeah.
engage in digital asset transactions,
Yeah.
then it shouldn't be scary for smaller tier players, right? And individual investors. You may not like cryptocurrencies as an asset class because for whatever reason, it doesn't represent anything. It's just, FOMO, marketing hype, or, volatility, or, whatever. That's fine, right? But to dismiss the entirety of the asset class on the basis that, nobody wants to touch them because of it, the regulatory ugly. I think at that point we're certainly, I'm seeing a tremendous shift and a tremendous lean in by institutions, particularly in market infrastructure, because they know digital asset market infrastructure is absolutely where it's going to go. Whether it stays cryptocurrency and you've got Buttcoin or whatever somebody's trading around out there, but
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not going to argue in
yeah.
favor or against any particular project, but it's representative of what is possible and what is to come. And now it's time to start to build out that next just like the internet, right? When the internet came along, it was very nascent, hobbyist university projects, very early players. And then the enterprise, commercial enterprises are like, well, this internet technology is interesting, but we don't want to really connect to the big public internet. That's scary. So we'll create intranets,
Yeah.
right? And then we'll get our feet in the water and dip our toe. And then they realize, well, we can just run it on the internet. It's all fine. We have, cybersecurity and protections to wall off our own little space, but it's still, public network. So same thing's happening in blockchain and crypto at this point.
No, and that's what I really enjoy, and we encourage all the people that we're working with on the real estate side, or even outside the real estate sphere, to take time, do the research, and so that leads me to my last question for you. If I'm newer or newish, and I would suggest that's probably 80 to 90% of the people out there to blockchain and some of the elements within the cryptocurrency space, where are you having people go to learn more about it and to do it in a what I like to call a mindful way? Because I started with podcasts and loved it, but as I kept moving forward and moving forward, what I did learn and understand is there's elements of lens. Somebody who's trying to promote something, they might push it in one direction, and then there's other people. So there's this. So you need to understand sort of what your sourcing is, and but the end game is just to learn more about it. So what would you suggest to our listeners?
Well, first of all, divide the investment conversation away from the technology function. And I think that you'll separate a lot of wheat from chaff right there out of the gate. And if you really want to understand blockchain, and you're watching videos on YouTube of people pitching, like the merits of the rates of return of a particular coin because it's trade volume and blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah, that's probably not your information source. And you should probably not, despite how compelling the marketing, pitchman
Yeah.
copy might be, you really want meat and potatoes. And so, understanding the practical use cases of a particular project, or go to the engineering fundamentals. And I know that's hard because engineering is hard, right? it's
Yeah.
just it's like really
Yes.
to separate that signal to noise ratio. I think that, personally, I find my relevance in my real time information feed on Twitter. And I think whether you like Twitter or not from a political standpoint, you have to let people make their own choices. But at least from a relevance and a real time and great way to get a lot of perspectives quickly and assimilate a lot of different viewpoints around a particular news event or an occurrence or a statement by a government regulator, whatever. There's a lot of great information available. Reddit, it's a little nerdier. You kind of going to go down rabbit holes on Reddit, but for people that just want to get immersed, find great resources of information, follow them, and always do your homework, right? I mean, do
Yep.
your own research.
Trust
But
and verify.
that's it. But
Yeah.
just separate the investment opportunity
Yeah.
away, way, just
Yeah. That when somebody starts pitching that, I always tell people, I go, then it's the information is agenda. There's a backbone of agenda behind it. So it might be 100% accurate, but
correct.
you just have to
There are
have
guys
your
knocking it down.
radar. Yeah, you got to have New
Trading is
England.
its own competency. If trading
Yeah,
is what you're about, then go the other direction. Don't even pay
yeah,
attention to the engineering conversation
yeah,
because it'll probably make you a crappy trader. But
yeah,
because it's all about return and money at that point. You don't worry about the validity of the long tail of our project. I'm just looking for the peaks and valleys in a incremental basis on the trading side. But if you really want to understand the shift of cryptocurrencies at the technology layer into the enterprise, real world adoption, the future use cases at the institutional organizational level, then it's technology first. And in 20 years, blockchain will be no more exciting than email is today, right? It's just baked into the daily nomenclature and our vocabulary.
No, this has really been great, and you've provided so many great insights and helping us understand what's going on in the blockchain space today. How can people get in touch with you if they want to reach out to you, Michael, and learn more about 10xts and some of the exciting projects that you all are working on?
Yeah, I mean, we're easy to find. 10xts, 10xts.com on the web. I'm easy to find. I'm on Twitter at Michael Hiles, MICHAELHILES. I'm on LinkedIn. Follow me on LinkedIn, and always feel free to reach out.
And I would highly recommend Michael is a great follow on both Twitter and LinkedIn. He's got some he mixes the engineering with the humor with a little bit of snarkiness, which I enjoy. I want to thank you so much for coming
Thanks, Chip.
on. Good stuff. Always fun to talk with you and work with you. Your team and your group, you've got a great group you've assembled at 10xts, and we've really enjoyed working with your entire team and looking forward to more progress. But thanks again, and I'm sure you and I'll be talking soon, and we'll be out. This is it for episode 2. Thanks for listening.